You ever walk past an old house and just wonder, about the people who lived there, the lives they led? Well, today, we're doing more than wondering. We're unlocking the door to one specific house that holds the secrets of an entire era.
So here's our plan. We're going to peel back the layers of this place by looking at the different families who called it home. We'll start with the Irish gentry running from chaos, then dig into a fortune built on sugar and empire, and finally see what happens when the new industrialists arrive on the scene.
So, that's the big question we're asking. If these walls could actually talk, what stories of fortune, fear, and empire would they whisper? That's exactly what we're about to find out.
See, this is about so much more than just bricks and mortar. This is the story of Powys House, and it's basically a perfect little window into the hidden world of the Victorian age. All its drama, its wealth, and its dark secrets.
All right, so our story kicks off not with the owners, but with renters, people who saw this house as a safe harbor from a world that was literally falling apart around them. So let's meet our first residents, Catherine Hamilton and her brother William Meade Smythe. They show up in 1859. Now, they're Anglo-Irish gentry, the ruling class. But here's the thing. They're both widowed, and they have just up and left their home in Ireland. And the big question is, why? I mean, you really can't overstate the difference here. On one side, you've got quiet, peaceful Devon, a place you go to retire and feel safe. On the other side, you have the Ireland they just left behind, a country still reeling from famine, financial collapse, and simmering with violence. They weren't just moving, they were getting out.
And that simmering violence, it eventually just exploded into something called the Land War. Now, this wasn't a formal war with armies. No, this was a brutal, grassroots conflict where tenant farmers who were pushed to the absolute brink started organizing against the landlords. We're talking boycotts, threats, and targeted attacks.
And this is where it gets really personal for the Smythe family. An agricultural recession hits, and the tension on their family estate, a place called Barbavilla, it just skyrockets. In April of 1882, their tenants demand a huge 20% rent cut. Just a couple days later, violence erupts.
And here is the absolute gut punch of the story. While Catherine was living safely in Powys House, her sister-in-law, a woman who had her exact same first and middle names, was murdered back at the family estate in Ireland, shot dead. The very violence they had fled had caught up with their family anyway. Just stop and think about that for a second. The murdered woman was Catherine Elizabeth Smythe. The woman safe in Devon was born Catherine Elizabeth Smythe. For her, that news must have been beyond chilling. It was literally the proverbial bullet with her name on it. And you have to think, that move to Powys House might have been the very thing that saved her life.
Okay, so the people renting the house were running from a violent past, but what about the family that actually owned the place? Well, their story is rooted in a very different and, you could argue, much darker history.
The owners were the Floyd family. In 1870, a widow named Mary Floyd moved back in. And on the surface, they look like just another respectable family. But the money, the foundation that their comfortable life was built on, that came from thousands of miles away.
And the source of that money is, well, it's pretty explicit. Mary's father, William Murray, is described as a returned Jamaican slave owner. This wasn't just a vague description, it was a specific class of people who made their fortunes off the forced labor of enslaved people on sugar plantations and then came back to Britain to live out their days as wealthy, respected members of society.
And we're not talking about some abstract concept here. The family's wealth was tied to very real places, plantations with names like the Latium Estate and Garland Grove Pen in Jamaica. The peace and quiet of Powys House in Devon were directly paid for by the profits generated by these estates and the enslaved people who worked them.
So, we've got the old landed gentry fleeing conflict and a family living on wealth from the colonies. But the Victorian era was also about the rise of a brand new power, industrial money. And pretty soon, that money came knocking on the door of Powys House.
Right, so in between all these gentry families, a totally different kind of person rents the house, George Edmund Balfour. This guy wasn't aristocracy with old family land. He was a massively successful cotton merchant from the industrial engine room of Manchester. He was the face of the new elite, the ones whose power came from commerce, not titles.
And his wealth was just staggering. To start his company, Balfour put in 100,000 pounds of his own money. To put that in perspective, in today's money, you're looking at tens of millions. This was a whole new level of fortune, and with it came a whole new level of ambition.
And see, Balfour didn't just move to Sidmouth to retire and play golf.
He was a businessman. He basically used Powys House as a foothold, a postal address, right before he went and bought the entire local manor estate. And what does he do with that influence? He pushes to bring the ultimate symbol of industrial progress, the railway, right into town. This guy was a modernizer, a real disruptor.
Balfour dies suddenly, and the next family to move in, the Kennett Dawsons, well, this is where all the stories start to connect. They were actually related by marriage to the Floyds, the original slave-owning family. And this is exactly how the Victorian era worked. The lines started to blur. New industrial money started to merge with old landed wealth, creating this incredibly powerful new ruling class.
So let's just take a step back for a second. What have we actually seen here? 3 completely different families, 3 completely different worlds, all playing out inside the very same 4 walls.
It's like this one house lets us see the biggest forces that define the entire Victorian age. You've got the old gentry running from violence, the dark colonial money that fueled the empire, and the raw power of the industrialists who were busy building a new future.
And that really is the whole story of Powys House. It was never just a building. It was a stage. It presented itself as this quiet, peaceful English haven, but its very tranquility was paid for by violent conflict in Ireland, by the profits of slavery in Jamaica, and by the disruptive force of industry. It's the perfect little microcosm of the era's contradictions.
So it makes you think, doesn't it? The next time you're walking down your own street, maybe take a closer look at some of the older buildings. What kind of global dramas, hidden fortunes, and incredible human stories are just waiting there, hiding in plain sight?